everyone. As you can see, it's Wednesday, and yes, we're going to be doing a book review. And you might be wondering, if you watched one of my previous videos, I did talk about all of the books that I wanted to read over the summer. And hold on a sec, let me get the other book. Yes, this book. I'm still working on it. It's really big. It's been really hard to get me. It's been really hard for me to get through it. But what I will try to do is I will try to see if I can get some more time with it. I really want to get some more time with it. I'll ask, because it's due today. So I'm gonna go to my library and see if they'll just let me borrow it for another 2 weeks, so I can just finish this one in particular. And yeah, that's basically. So that's what basically I just wanted to clarify with everybody. It's just that I am reading this. It's taking me forever because it's just so big. So having that being said, I wanted to, and I decided that since I am not done with this book, why not review a book that I have already read and I found to be very interesting, and that is called The Good Conscience by Carlos Fuentes. I apologize, I'm probably pronouncing that name incorrectly. I'm not good at Spanish. I did not take Spanish. I took German for 3 years in high school, so not really good with Spanish. But basically this book takes place in Mexico, and it follows the young and teenage life of Jamie, who is the main character, as he grows up in a religious Catholic family that is run by his uncle and aunt, because his mother did not have a good standing in the family, and so she was sort of shunned, and his father is kind of an alcoholic and depressed by the circumstances that led to the separation of him and his wife, and he feels pretty much worthless. So the whole family dilemma is that Jamie is supposed to be the one that carries on the family name. Jamie's the one who's supposed to be he's the future of the family, basically. And the aunt and the uncle are really trying to make sure that he lives up to that family order. And the problem with that is that they are rich. They do have a good sum of money. However, they don't really necessarily support the poor. They don't have these kinds of values that may be considered hypocritical to some people, whether you are religious or not, because some things within religion tell you that you should help poor people. And Jamie sort of sees this hypocrisy, and as you go through the book, you will sort of realize through his voice and through his perspective, even though it's not told in his voice, you will kind of get the gist of why Jamie ends up rebelling because of this sort of authority. Because they train him to basically take on the family, take on the business, and take on being something, but it's not that's something that Jamie ultimately wants to be. And you will see how this really conflicts in the story and how it really plays out. For the most part, it plays out in sort of like 3 stages. There's a stage of where Jamie is a young boy and he's sort of okay with the way things are, until something happens to him, and as he becomes more of a teenager, he begins to rebel. And this rebellion ends up causing a lot of confusion, and sometimes he even hurts himself, because sometimes he feels like it's his fault for being himself. And he oftentimes blames himself for the certain circumstances that he's in. And he just doesn't know what to do about it, though, because as you will notice, Jamie is a pretty humanistic character. He's not perfect, and I like the fact that he isn't perfect, and that he wants to try to make something of himself out of what the family wants him to be. And then it sort of plays into the into the whole idea later on that he feels sort of powerless and that he can't rise to the occasion and be who he wants to be, and has to conform to his family. And this novel is sort of dressing things in a socio-political type way. So if you like politics, if you like these kinds of things, Jamie's life is pretty much surrounded by it constantly. And you will see that by the characters he comes across, because the characters that he comes across who happen to be poor and less well off than him and his family, he grows attached to them. He identifies with them. He understands what they're going through. And it's very fascinating. It's really fascinating to read. And it sort of addresses the sort of hypocrisy of the way how his family raises him, and into the way he feels that people should be treated. And again, it's sort of playing itself out in that socio-political type way. And I wanted to briefly compare this to another book called 1984. You've probably heard that one, that's really famous. This one is a lot similar. And the way I describe the plot, if you've read 1984, it kind of plays out in that same way. He's just an ordinary boy trying to get by in 1984. The main character, Winston, is someone who's just going along with the system, going along with the government. And then he comes across some people, and then he realizes, hey, you know what? This isn't right. They've opened my mind, they've opened my way of thinking. I want to rebel. And as they do rebel, they end up getting caught, him and the other characters, and he's forced to, again, conform. And this sort of plays in the same way as 1984 does. Same plot, structure, in that sense, of the way of how I described it. But for the most part, what I can say about this book is that it is good. It is, if you like political sociology, if you like these kinds of books, if you're into politics, if you like certain kinds of culture, you will particularly like this one. I encourage people who have a Mexican background or a Latin American background, I encourage you to definitely read this, because they do have some cultural things in there that do associate with Latin American culture. In particular, sort of the religious holidays. Some religious holidays are in here, and you'll see how Jamie sort of ends up kind of observing those celebrations. You do see those things there for the most part, and you kind of see how this whole culture of tradition and culture of authority plays out in that sense, because this is taking place during an earlier time period. It's not taking place in today's time period. It's probably around, I'm not exactly sure. I want to say it's probably in the 19th century. I don't think it's in the 21st century. But I think it is a really good book that is trying to address some of these socio-political issues, and it plays itself out a lot like 1984. If you like 1984, you probably will be really intrigued by this. And what intrigues me most, I think, about this particular book is that it's doing it through means of culture, showing you the cultural traditions, and that's why I think I find it maybe a little bit, maybe sometimes more engaging maybe than 1984, because 1984 doesn't really follow necessarily a culture. It just follows a system of order. But tradition and authority is really part of the culture. So you see how those kind of intertwine together. Jamie being in a religious household and all those kinds of things. So definitely worth looking into. I think this author is really brilliant. And also to people who may not necessarily like books, I understand that. I know a lot of people who may like movies, may like things more visually. And I totally understand this. However, I do want to mention, though, the fact that this book is really, really small. I mean, look at this and compare it to this. It's like a 12th of the size. So my point being is that the book does sort of play out like a screenplay. It does play out like, you know, an ending of a scene when the chapter ends. And this took me only like 3 days to read. Most 3, 4, something. Let me see how many chapters there were. There's only 10 chapters. Yeah, I think I remember reading it like in 2 or 3 days. I think it was 2 actually. I think I just read 5. And it only has 148 pages. Excuse me. And I think that's rather good. I think that's a really, really small book, and it doesn't take much of your time away. But the ideas and the concepts in the book can be talked about for days on end. I mean, I think I thought of this book. It took me more. This book makes you think, and I think that's a really good point in what it's trying to address with these socio-political issues and how those socio-political issues play out today. We do kind of see this thing play out in our politics today, and if you read this book, you will definitely understand those kinds of socio-political issues. So if I encourage anybody to read this book, I think it is very insightful. And it tries to challenge the reader in the ways of thinking, and I think this author did a really good job of doing that. And yeah, it's if you're not into like things that are more played out in a screenplay, then you probably might not be so engaged in it. And I think that's what kind of drew me out of it, was because it doesn't have like really nice descriptive language. It's sort of kind of straightforward. And I think that's what sucked me out a bit. So if you don't really like this type of reading, then I would say maybe best thing is just to maybe skip this particular book. But for me, I really enjoyed it. I really liked this book. I thought it was engaging at times and very thought-provoking. I liked it more when we talked about the book than actually reading the book itself, for me. Because it brought up a lot of these issues, and the teacher, I told the teacher my comparison to 1984, and like he was fascinated. He was like, wow, that's a really good comparison. So if you like 1984, if you like these kinds of socio-political books, if you like books that are sort of rebellious in nature, this can be really engaging for you. It can be really thought-provoking, and it'll allow you to think. And I think this book really does a good job, because these socio-political books do try to make you think. They do try to make you think of what reality is, what authority is, you know, what it means to be authority. And you'll see kind of how the characters that Jamie comes across, and his uncle and aunt, and how they're not really concerned about Jamie's well-being or his welfare. They're more concerned about the family. They're more concerned about making sure that everything sort of stays the way it is and doesn't change. It doesn't progress. It doesn't move forward. It just is. It just maintains this kind of tradition. And you will see how these two kinds of different ways of thinking clash. Jamie's ways of thinking and his uncle's and aunt's way of thinking. So definitely worth checking out. Definitely worth reading. It's so short. It's not so long, and I think that's what's good. If you don't like long books, because the books that I have been reviewing are kind of long and, you know, maybe too drawn out for some people, definitely try to read this one, because this is a lot shorter. This is more played out like a movie. If you want to like do film, this is definitely something worth looking into, because it plays out like a screenplay. It's not written in the form of a screenplay, but it's sort of played out that way. Instead, you have a chapter, which is like a scene, and then the next chapter is another scene, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that's really all I can say about this book. Good Conscience, check it out. The good conscience means something, and you will realize the meaning of that as you go on in the book. and it kind of deals with that, that whole socio-political issue of, what's right, what's wrong, and things of that nature. So definitely worth looking into, and I think that's really all I can say. Any comments, questions, concerns, more than happy to answer them. And until next time, folks, bye-bye.